In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create a counter using the useReducer hook. This counter should be able to increment the count value, decrement the count value, and reset the value back to 0. I'm going to start off by creating a new folder called components. And within the folder, I'm going to create a file called reducercount.js. Within the new file, I'm going to use the React snippet RASCE to create a functional component. For the JSX, I'm going to create 3 buttons. One to increment, one to decrement, and one to reset. Next, we need a count variable that can be displayed within the JSX, and this is where we need useReducer. There are a couple of things to understand, so let's break it down and go over each step. First step, we need to import useReducer from React. Just like the other hooks, useReducer is also a function. We simply have to call it in our functional component, so useReducer. useReducer accepts 2 arguments. The first one is the reducer function, and the second one is the initial state. But these are not defined yet. So for step 2, let's define the initial state and the reducer function. I'm going to define them outside the component. First, the initial state. A counter will start off with a value of 0. So the initial value, which is going to be the initial state, is going to be 0. Next, we define the reducer function. Const reducer is equal to an arrow function. Again, a reducer function accepts 2 values and returns 1 value. The 2 values accepted are the current state and the action. These are the parameters to the reducer function. Now I also mentioned that the reducer function returns 1 value, which is the new state. Just for the sake of understanding, I'm going to add the statement return new state. So the reducer function accepts the current state and returns the new state. But for this transition to happen, we need something. And that something is this action parameter. You can think of action as an instruction to the reducer function. Based on what the action specifies, the user function performs the necessary straight transition. For example, we can have 3 actions: increment, decrement, and reset. The convention to execute code based on the action is to use switch statements. So within the reducer function body, we're going to add a switch statement. The switch expression is the action. The action itself can be increment, in which case increment. The new state will be current state plus 1. Action can also be decrement, in which case the new state will be current state minus 1. And finally, action can also be reset, in which case the new state will just be the initial state of 0. So return initial state. We can also have a default case, for which I will simply return the current state. So this is the reducer function, which is passed to the useReducer hook. Based on the action value, the function will either increment, decrement, or reset the counter value. So that is our step 2, defining the initial state and the reducer function. For the third and final step, we need to get a hold of the value to display in the JSX, and we also need to call the reducer function with the appropriate action. Now that happens to be really simple, as that is exactly what useReducer returns. Similarly to useState, useReducer also returns a pair of value, which can get a hold of the array, the structure and syntax. So const count, comma, dispatch is equal to useReducer. So useReducer returns the current state, which we have called as count, paired with a dispatch method. The dispatch method allows us to execute the code corresponding to a particular action. In the JSX, we can now add an h2 header that displays the count value. And to each of the buttons, we can also add an onClick handler. OnClick is equal to an arrow function, where we dispatch an action. For the increment button, we're going to dispatch the increment action. And let's do the same for the rest of the buttons. Easy copy and paste. Decrement. and reset. When you dispatch increment, it adds 1 to the current value. If you dispatch decrement, it subtracts 1 from the current value. If you dispatch the reset action, it returns the initial value of 0. So let's check it out in app.js and test it out. First, let's render it in the app component. Import, and let's render it. Reduce it current. Alright, cool. Now let's check it out. You can see that initially we have the count set to 0. I click on increment, it increases by 1. I click on decrement, it decreases. Increment, increase, 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 decrease. I click on reset, it should reset to 0. As you can see, the counter is working as expected.